Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Wednesday edition of Video Clips. I'm wearing my Make Americans Free Again shirt. I'm making a lot of videos today. This is a crazy, crazy couple of weeks for me for a variety of reasons, lots of stuff going on. So that's why I'm sitting here in the same shirt making video after video, because you guys do comment on that. So I just thought I'd tell you there's a reason why. Anyway, on Wednesdays, I talk about the non-science part of all of this. And so I decided today I wanted to talk about happiness because I sure do hear from a lot of people who are really miserable in this whole thing. And I think some of this material I took from an article called From the Two Levels of Happiness by Conan Miller of the Epoch Times. So anyway, that's where I took some of this, and then some of it comes from another source, but I wanted to make sure I gave credit for parts of it that his article contributed. So first of all humans seek happiness. I mean, I don't know anybody who likes being miserable. I mean, some people, they behave as if they like being miserable, but I don't think people really enjoy that. And during the last almost year-long debacle, the level of happiness has reached unprecedented heights. And I hear from people all the time who say, you know, normally I'm a happy person. It's just that lately I just can't hardly keep it together. So how do we achieve and remain happy while the world is a crazy place and all this is going on around us? Is it impossible to do? I don't think so if we go about it by understanding happiness and the source of it, and we maybe change our thinking about a few things. So anyway, in this article, The Two Levels of Happiness, you can probably Google this and read it online, I'm sure. Satisfaction with life is a higher concept than just happiness that you try to experience on a day-to-day basis. In other words, what the author is saying is you need to look at the bigger picture of your life, your home and your career and your friends and hobbies and your purpose. I think this is very important. That's much more important than what happens in a given moment or in a given day. Some of which can be pretty negative. I mean, I've had some bad days since this all started, some very frustrating days and some difficult experiences. You know, one good example of how the day-to-day can be quite different from the step back and take a different look at things is looking at the parenting. Most people say that they like being parents. I'm sure there are people who don't, but most people do. Yet, if you were to catch a parent at the wrong moment when a child is acting out or the parent's just exhausted and the baby won't stop crying, you know, they'll tell you that they're frustrated and aggravated and the whole 9 yards, but that passes really quickly as soon as they take a step back and revert back to the seeing the bigger picture about things. And I think that's a real important thing here. And it brings me to a point the author makes in his article, which is there are two levels of happiness. One is the day-to-day happiness, which is referred to as hedonic happiness. And the other is big picture happiness, which is called eudaimonic happiness. So hedonic happiness comes from the Greek term, which means pleasure. And it results from creature comforts. I mean, what feels good in the moment? You get new clothes, delicious food, a glass of wine, sex, right? These are all things that feel good right now. On the other hand, eudaimonic happiness refers to the human need for purpose and meaning, and that's stepping back and saying what's really going on in a bigger picture. There's nothing wrong, by the way, with seeking hedonic happiness. We all do. I do too. But when this short-term, in-the-moment happiness is the only thing that you're seeking, you're in trouble. Because humans do need meaning and purpose in their life. That's how they get real satisfaction. There's something called the hedonic treadmill. And what it means is you get on this treadmill, it's seeking pleasure. And then you want more and more and more. I mean, take a heroin addict. They talk about there's a term that they use, chasing the dragon is what I was looking for. Which means that you need more and more drugs to just feel normal and enormous amounts of drugs to get high again. You just can't get enough. And so it really goes to the point that you can never achieve happiness in response to pleasure seeking. And it's not that you're not going to pleasure seek. Again, we all do it, but it can't be the only thing going on. And by the way, the treadmill, the hedonic treadmill is not limited to vices like drugs or alcohol or sugar or chocolate or whatever it is that you're doing too much of. It can be like you can't make enough money, you can't have a big enough house, you can't have expensive cars. And again, it's okay to have a big house and expensive cars and to seek to make money. It just isn't okay to never have enough, and it's not okay to define your life by looking at these kinds of things. It was interesting. A researcher asked a cohort of women in Ohio to report the high points of their day. And none of them, very few of them reported creature comforts. They reported things like religious activity, prayer, and hobbies. They were at the top of the list. Now, as we go into thinking about how to be happy, I think one thing is to look at just the way things are. And that is, research shows that bad experiences often have a greater influence on us than good ones in terms of our emotional state. In a 2000 review called Bad is Stronger Than Good, it was shown that good experiences, if you have like a lot of good experiences, they can overrule the bad over time. So you can have something really cataclysmically terrible happen, but if you have enough good stuff happen, it kind of puts that in perspective. But it is true and quite predictable that if you have a bad thing and a good thing, it is human nature to focus on the bad thing more, all right? There are some people, I don't know if this is true or not, but they think that the focusing on negative feelings associated with something going wrong might be a survival mechanism. In other words, when early humans were wandering around the earth, if something bad happened to them that could threaten their survival, it would be good to remember that that's not a good idea to repeat. But we're not in that situation anymore. And so we might still be focusing on all negative rather than positive. It also could mean that a person just tends to see, the glass half empty versus the glass half full. And I know people like that. And this tendency to look at things from a negative perspective, I think there's no question that it gets worse during times like we're experiencing right now. There's a lot of anxiety and depression and uncertainty and that sort of thing. So what I want to do now is, those are the things I took from the article, and I think they're just wonderful, wonderful points. But what I want to do now is talk to you about how do you shift from the negative to the positive? How do you find happiness in the midst of this mess that we're going through? Well, I think the first thing is gratitude. Count your blessings. My very, very good friend, Dr. Peter Breggin, says it's really hard to be depressed when you're in a state of gratitude. And I think that there's a tendency to count your blessings when things are bad. It's like you're trying to remind yourself it's not so bad. But what if you started counting your blessings every day, which would inoculate you a little bit against the bad things? I've been doing that for almost a year now. I get up every morning, I hug my cat. I think that I'm just fortunate to not have health issues, my business is okay. Most of my relationships are intact. I mean, I can list 100 things. If I had to, I could list 100 things I'm grateful for. And maybe that's the place to start. List 100 things that you have to be grateful for. And so this is a little bit, like I said before, of inoculation against some of the negative things that will happen. And I think, to put it in perspective, it is just fantastical thinking to think that everything's just going to be a bowl of cherries all the time. It's just not, that's not the way life is. Another thing is learning how to interpret events differently. Like if you think that your whole day is ruined because somebody yelled at you about not wearing a mask, well, how about putting it in perspective? Because if you think back on some things that have happened to you, bad things that happened to you, almost always later on, they seem pretty inconsequential. You just don't care about them. And I don't know where this came from. I would give credit if I knew, but the rule of 7. Somebody told me this when I was sideways about something. And so one of the things to ask yourself is, how is this going to impact you 7 hours from now? How about 7 days or 7 weeks or 7 months or 7 years? Well, in other words, if you were taking bad experiences and things that make you feel terrible and you're projecting them out, by 7 weeks, most people are like, I won't even remember that it happened. Sometimes by 7 hours. I mean, somebody, you really screw something up and you feel terrible about it. Usually 7 hours later, unless you did something heinous, it's like, oh, well, had a bad day. By the next morning, you don't even care, right? So anyway, think of it that way. And I've shared with you in some previous videos that, like all people my age, I've lived through some difficult times. And some of these experiences, as I look back, were clearly self-inflicted. I brought the disasters on myself. Some of them were inflicted upon me, and some of them were just life happens, But even the scariest ones, and I've had a couple things that were very frightening, again, in my autobiography someday. And some of the worst things, I really have to tell you that they're inconsequential right now. They weren't at the time. They were horribly frightening, but they're It's over. And sometimes I go for, unless somebody brings it up, I wouldn't even remember or think about it every day. So this isn't about denial. It's not about changing the reality of the situation. And it's not about just happy thoughts. When people say, oh, just think about happy things, I mean, that's moronic. Okay, it's hard to just think about happy things. It's really looking at things from a different perspective. And one thing that you might ask yourself when you're just upside down about something is, if I were a positive person, how would a positive person respond to this situation? Well, how about if you do that too? And it can automatically make things better. And last but not least, I want to go back to something that I focused on at the beginning of the video, which is finding purpose in your life. If you have a reason to get up in the morning, something that's important to you, and it doesn't have to be something that's economically viable. It can be a hobby. It can be taking care of grandchildren. It can be playing cards with friends. I mean, just something that you enjoy doing, or playing cards with people in senior citizens' homes, in places in the United States, the People's Republic of America, where you're allowed to go in there, doing volunteer work. It can be raising money for a worthy cause, helping people who are food insecure right now. Mine is Make Americans Free Again, lawsuits and freeing the people, and homeschooling, and just providing resources. Okay, so if you have a purpose, I think that overrides. It's like, this really is miserable right now, but I have more important things to think about. And I can say that from my experience. As long as I have something more important to think about, I can shift away from the negative thing that's happening. And I've been able to do this for a long time. It took a long time to get to that place, but I realized back in the days when I was doing self-destructive things that that wasn't going to take me anywhere I wanted to go. And so some of you watching this, you may not be doing self-destructive things, but you may be more miserable than you need to be, right? So if you have something important to do, if you have something that you want to help with, a reason for getting up in the morning, I think you'll find that if you focus on that, some of the rest of the stuff is just, I call it noise. A lot of the negative stuff, negative emails, I don't get that many, maybe 2 a week now, but people screaming at me, or government officials behaving the way they do, and not being able to go to restaurants, and a lot of it's just background noise. And in the scheme of things, when we look back at this in a while, in a few years, none of us are going to have cared whether or not we ate out. We're going to care about how we acted during this period of time, how the compassion we showed to other people, and that we practiced what we preach. I mean, I'm constantly criticizing the tone deaf people who inflict this misery on people and just keep marching on, or the sheep who help them. Let's not be that. All right, we're going to remember how we behaved. We're going to remember how many people we helped, and so stay focused on that, and I think it will get you through the days. So it's what I'm doing. I hope it helps you. Thanks for watching. Pass this on to other people who you think might enjoy watching it, and I'll be back to you tomorrow with more news.